Welcome to the 2019 Engineering Science Education Conference Keynote session. My name is Stefan Momich. I'm a fourth year Math, Stats, and Finance student. It is great seeing so many of you here. As a fourth year student, I remember when I attended ESEC, and looking back at my experience, ESEC was instrumental in helping me choose my option. At this time, I'd like to call on the Chair of Engineering Science, Professor Deepa Kunder, to give some welcoming remarks. How's it going?
Thank you, Stefan. So when I walked into the room earlier today, I was met by Leanne from Wealthsimple, and so she mentioned one of the fantastic things about EngSci students, and U of T engineering overall is a diversity. So we've got diversity of students, diversity of faculty, staff, and it's really a strength of the University of Toronto community. And so to celebrate our diversity and where we come from and where we've evolved from, it's customary, as you all know, to start the opening of events with a land acknowledgement statement. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 14th Annual Engineering Science Education Conference called ESEC. ESEC is an annual conference exclusively for engineering science students at the University of Toronto. And the objectives are to broaden engineering science students' horizons by introducing you to a variety of career paths, to help make you informed decisions as to your specialization in the third and fourth year, and to help you build your network and get networking skills. Now, since 2006, we've been inviting world leaders to represent our various majors and to talk about research, technical development, and career opportunities for young engineers. It's unique for undergraduate students to get access to thought leaders such as these. In the past, we've hosted Geoffrey Hinton, the father of artificial intelligence, Norman Doidge, the leader in brain neuroplasticity, and David St. Jacques, a Canadian astronaut. This year, we have another amazing lineup. So for the first time, we have a speaker on the topic of machine intelligence. More than half the speakers are themselves engineering science alumni. We've got Meena Mitri, EngSci 1T2, co-founder and CEO of Kepler Communications. His ultimate mission is to bring internet connectivity to space. We also have Dr. Arthur Slutsky, EngSci 70, who is a professor of medicine, surgery, and biomedical engineering at the University of Toronto, and for 18 years led the research program at St. Michael's Hospital. We have Vivian Say, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in electrical engineering, and she's going to talk about energy-aware signal processing algorithms and low-power circuit systems for design of portable multimedia applications. We have Ravi Thurasingham, EngSci 88, who is an industry leader in the energy sector with experience in successful solar energy technology development and startups. He's the founder, chair, and CEO of Modern Utility, Inc., and a member of EngSci's board of advisors. We have Shoshana Sachs. Where is Shoshana? Shoshana, who is a professor in CivMin who focuses on environmental sustainability. She says that our infrastructure systems are the skeletal structure of society and they drive how we live. We have Patricia Burschat, EngSci 81, who is a physics professor at Stanford, and she served as department chair and won several teaching awards. She will talk about the need for team science for solving really big problems. We also have Jessica Bergner-Kars, who is a professor in Hanover, Germany, but we will be welcoming her to the University of Toronto community as she'll be joining computer science, and her expertise is in continuum robotics. And last, we have Xavier Snellgrove, EngSci 1TO PEY, who founded a startup called Worldscape while still in engineering science, which was accepted to the Y Combinator Accelerator program in California to develop its keyboards and emoji tools. Now, I'm going to let Stefan introduce our keynote speaker today, but before I do that, I wanted to talk to you about the exciting format we have for this session. So after the presentation, we will have an opportunity for a fireside chat, and then we're going to open the questions to you all. Now, I really encourage you all to take this opportunity to ask what's on your mind, because chances are, if you're inquisitive and you're really curious about something, so is someone else. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand, and as soon as you're selected, stand up and clearly and loudly ask your question. Finally, I want to ask that everyone consider and please come to the ESEC networking reception tomorrow at Hart House at 5:30 p.m. In recent years, students have made important connections either for summer research or have even found mentors who've been very, very supportive of them. So please join us. Now I pass the floor back to Stefan.
Thank you, Professor Kundar. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Brett Huneycutt, the COO and co-founder of Wealthsimple. Brett truly is an innovator and has helped change the way people save and invest. Financial management services like access to financial advisors has traditionally been reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Wealthsimple helped change that by allowing everyday people to set up their own portfolios in minutes. With an educational background in economics and mathematics from Boston College and Oxford University, he has demonstrated lifelong learning throughout his career, a trait we really promote and encourage here at Engineering Science. From applying his knowledge of economics at the U.S. Embassy to a career in management consulting at McKinsey, to founding and co-founding several companies, most notably 1000memories.com and now Wealthsimple, Brett has continuously excelled in various fields by never shying away from new challenges and learning opportunities. We are extremely grateful and honored to have him with us today. With careers spanning technology and finance, his experience relates to a multitude of engineering science options, from computer engineering and robotics to machine intelligence and math stats finance. Without further ado, please help me welcome Brett Huneycutt to the podium.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me today. It's a real honor to be here at the University of Toronto speaking with you. Many, actually, of the talented colleagues that I get to work with every day have either graduated from the U of T or are current students of the University of Toronto, so it's awesome to be here at a place that's been so formative to them. I also feel a bit humbled to be speaking specifically on the topic of innovation at a place that's known globally for its innovation in myriad fields across machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biomedicine, finance, to name a few. It's very humbling to be here, and it's an honor. I'd like to focus today on a somewhat narrow definition of innovation, which is really about how to deliver innovation to customers at a large scale in the marketplace. And hopefully some of the lessons that I've been able to pick up from working in startups for the last decade or so also apply to deep tech as well. First, today, I think given the sort of nature of the talk and how it's a group of students trying to open their horizons about careers, wanted to speak a little bit about myself and my own career, as well as give you some background and context on Wealthsimple. And then second, wanted to talk specifically on the topic of innovation at Wealthsimple. So first of all, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, which is home to the saguaro cactus, and still really love the desert and the sunshine, even though I spend a lot of time here in Toronto and New York. I don't see as much of it as I'd like. And I'm also still a huge fan of the Phoenix Suns, but they've been terrible in recent years, so I've adopted the Toronto Raptors as my replacement team. As Stefan mentioned, I studied math and economics as an undergraduate at Boston College, and then I had the good fortune to win a Rhodes Scholarship, and I studied the MPhil in economics at Oxford University. And when I entered Oxford, I had actually planned to stay and do a PhD in economics. But after a couple of years, I realized that a career in research wasn't the right fit for me, and that I wanted to have a sort of more direct impact with my day-to-day work in the business world. So I thought I'd try my hand in the business world. And really having no idea what I wanted to do, I joined McKinsey & Company, which is the consulting firm, as the first step in my career. And I spent 3.5 years doing consulting work, first in New York for financial services companies, and then actually in Mexico City with the Mexican government and the Gates Foundation, doing a really cool entrepreneurial project there. But ultimately, I think I wanted to have more ownership over the day-to-day, more ownership and more of a vested stake in my day-to-day work, and I decided to move to San Francisco. So actually moved to San Francisco at the beginning of 2010 with a couple of my good friends. I quit my job and started a company. So we rented a house in the Mission District of San Francisco and started a company called 1000 Memories, which was focused on telling the life stories of ancestors and loved ones. And at the time, we didn't really know much about how to start a company or how to build a product or how to recruit a team or raise money, but we just tried to figure it out. So we spent, I think in the very early days, long days and nights teaching ourselves how to program, how to design products, and how to build stuff. And really, we caught a big break by being accepted into Y Combinator. I understand one of the other speakers I just heard was also accepted into Y Combinator, which is now known globally as one of the leading seed stage investment firms. They've invested in over 1,000 companies, the sort of very best few of which most people in the room will know, including Airbnb, Dropbox, Stripe, Coinbase, among others. But it was an incredible way to learn, and I definitely highly recommend any of the potential entrepreneurs in the room to consider applying to Y Combinator, or at least checking out their awesome content online. They have really amazing videos on YouTube about how to start a company that I highly recommend. And I think many of the lessons that I'm going to share today have been, I think, in large part inspired by YC. So, I think we were able to build a pretty talented team at 1000 Memories, and we built some interesting products that people liked, but we were never really able to reach the breakout traction required to succeed for a startup that doesn't have a business model. And fortunately, we got to know the team at Ancestry.com, which is the market leader in our space. It's a multi-billion-dollar company that now has over $1 billion in revenues a year. And they ended up acquiring us for what for us was a meaningful sum of money, sort of more money than we'd ever had before, but for them was sort of like just a drop in the bucket. And it ultimately ended up being a really good outcome for our clients, our users, our products, and they found a great home at Ancestry. But I guess I bring this up because a funny thing happens when the article announcing your startup's acquisition comes out on TechCrunch. And that is that your inbox becomes inundated with cold emails from financial advisors who want to help you try to manage the money you've made. And at the time, I knew very little about investing, other than the sort of academic training I'd received in grad school and undergrad. Though, my intuition suggested I probably shouldn't trust these random financial advisors who were contacting me. So instead, what I did was I turned to one of my colleagues at the time, who is now my co-founder and the CEO of Wealthsimple, Mike Katchen, who's long been interested in personal finance. And he got me set up on a diversified portfolio of low-cost index funds. And actually, this is a screenshot of the spreadsheet that he sent to me and the other members of the team to help advise us. And this was actually the beginning of Wealthsimple, and sort of like the beginning of Mike took the first steps of the company. The interesting thing I think that I learned about investing from this process was that what Mike was offering me still just wasn't enough. Like, I'm not the type of person that really wants to sort of think about or have to stress out about what to do with my investments each month and if I should rebalance them or not. And I just wanted Mike or someone else to do it for me. And I didn't want one of these financial advisors that I couldn't trust, but I wanted ideally some technology and some company that I could trust to do it for me. And for me, that was really the genesis of Wealthsimple. This sort of personal problem that I experienced, and it was one of the main reasons why I decided to move here to Toronto in the middle of 2014 to join Mike and help him start the company. And that's the end of, I guess, the background about me. Do want to give you a little bit more a bit of background on the company, though. Who in the room has heard of Wealthsimple? Okay, so a fair number of people. That's great. That's awesome. I think if we were having this conversation 4 years ago, no one would have heard about Wealthsimple. So it's awesome. It's awesome that so many folks have heard about us now. So we launched Wealthsimple in September of 2014, which is about 4.5 years ago. And we now serve over 100,000 clients, and we manage over $3 billion in assets, most of which are here in Canada, though we also have launched in the US and the UK as well. And our mission is to make financial services accessible to everyone, no matter who they are or how much money they have. And really, we focus on a few different things. I think the first thing that we try to do is we try to build really beautiful, intuitive digital tools. The second thing I think that's really unique about us is we've tried to create a really human, lifestyle-focused brand that our clients can trust. And the third thing, which I actually spend a lot of my days thinking about, is we've created a fully integrated back office that sort of handles all of the nuts and bolts of account opening and sort of the brokerage-related activities for your investment account. And both built the technology and the operations that power that. So one of our central theses of the business is that most financial services are just too complex and opaque for most people, and that our job as technologists and designers and entrepreneurs is to simplify and humanize the experience for the end client as much as possible. So, Wealthsimple is a fintech company. We're a financial services company and a technology company, but we like to think of ourselves as a technology company first. And I think one of the ways that you can see that is we're now a team of about 200 people, and we really target about 50% of our total employee base to be technical, so to be mostly software engineers and also product designers and product managers. There's this note here that we've won 2 consecutive Webby Awards, which is sort of like the Oscars of the internet, which I think is a testament to the really high quality team that we've been able to put together. Since this is a team full of engineers, I just wanted to sort of mention quickly how we structure our team. So, if you've used Wealthsimple or tried us out, you know that sort of our client-facing web app and our client-facing mobile apps are actually pretty small and quite simple. Obviously some of our engineers work on those client-facing applications, but it turns out that a large part of delivering a really simple client experience involves building technology to manage all of the complexity behind the scenes. So we have a large platform engineering team at our brokerage that's responsible for the key financial responsibilities like account opening, identity verification, funding, and trading, as well as the sort of key sort of central services like authentication and authorization and invoicing and other things. And we also have an infrastructure engineering team, which includes our DevOps team that sets up and runs the infrastructure that all of our code runs on, our data team, which is a new team that we're building out and we're really excited about now that we have what is a meaningful amount of data that we can start to leverage and to deliver value to our clients, as well as security and developer tools. So the second thing I mentioned was about our brand. And a big part of our brand really is to try to talk to our clients like human beings, not like a sort of a more robotic financial institution. And I think the funny thing is that we've been labeled as a robo-advisor, but we really try, I think, to be much more human than most other financial institutions. And I think we've done this in a couple ways. One is we've invested a lot in building out what I think is a really world-class creative team. Now, I have nothing to do with this part of our business, but one of our co-founders, Rudy, who's my lifelong friend, is really the creative talent at the company. And he's brought on a team of really outstanding designers and copywriters who have, I think, really been able to create this really awesome brand. And I guess I've put a couple things here on the slide. Maybe I'll mention the Money Diary series as an example of the way that we try to like humanize our brand. So the Money Diary series is a series that we publish on our magazine, our blog, which are basically interviews with celebrities and other interesting people about money. And I think one of the sort of like primary themes of these conversations is like the sort of intense anxiety that people feel around financial topics. And I think that, you know, talking about money is often a taboo subject that people like don't feel able to talk about it in public. And I think this is I think we managed to create what is a pretty interesting forum for people to have more public conversations about money. Maybe I'll just mention one other thing that you know, I think we often are portrayed in the media as disruptors. I'm not sure that we necessarily think about ourselves as disruptors. I think we like to think of ourselves as very innovative, but ultimately our mission is to help, you know, all of our clients achieve financial freedom. And lights on, lights off. Okay. And you know, we actually are developing a series of new initiatives to partner with existing financial institutions and financial advisors to offer better, lower cost, more accessible products to their clients as well. So you know, I don't think that we are necessarily disrupting the status quo entirely. So that's context about Wealthsimple. Wanted to shift the topic of conversation now to innovation and really how we try to innovate at Wealthsimple. And so in preparing for this presentation, I Googled innovation and found the definition on Wikipedia, which is a new idea, creative thoughts, new imaginations in the form of a device or a method. Innovation is often also viewed as the application of better solutions that meet new requirements, unarticulated needs, or existing market needs. So, you know, I think one of the ways that I'd probably like try to synthesize this is like ultimately it's like solving problems in better ways than have been done before. But the way we really think about it, I think the sort of heuristic we use at Wealthsimple is which we think is a little bit more tangible definition is, you know, really the motto that we borrow from Y Combinator, which is to make something that people want. And we really believe that is what like innovation in a commercial enterprise means. It's delivering something to the market that your clients want. And you know that you've been able to create something innovative when you made something that lots of people love to use. The challenge is that while it's sort of simple to explain, it's actually kind of hard to accomplish for at least a couple of different reasons. So, you know, first of all, you know, as Steve Jobs famously said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. So, you know, you can try to go talk to people and do surveys and use your intuition, yada, yada. But, you know, your customer ultimately, like, doesn't necessarily know what they want, and at the very least, they can't be expected to know whether or not they're going to want something that doesn't exist yet. So you really only know what people want once you are able to launch something and get people to use it and get the data and the feedback from clients about whether or not they actually want it. Which leads us to the second hard problem about making something people want, which is that it can often take a long time or a lot of money to build something. So, the problem of innovation then, in our mind, becomes like, how do you build something that tests whether or not people want it in as short of a timeline with as little money as possible? So this is pretty different than the old way of doing things. I think at Wealthsimple, we now have the opportunity to meet with a lot of business leaders from Canada's largest companies who tell us about how they're making innovation a priority. And we've noticed a bit of a pattern that a lot of companies tend to treat innovation as a project. So, they'll say, hey, we want to do this thing, and then they'll scope it all out from end to end, and then they'll find a team, like the innovation team, and they'll hire X number of people for the innovation team, and they'll get them to build this thing that they wanted to make, and then when the deadline comes around, they'll launch it. And that's sort of where the process ends, like the innovation process that an old school company will end at launch. And I think at Wealthsimple, and I think a lot of new companies that have come about in the last 10 or 20 years are really trying to use a very different model, which is to launch as quickly as possible first, and that's just the sort of the beginning of the innovation process. And the idea is that you get your product in the hands of your clients, and you can actually talk to them, and you can get data about how they use it, and you can use that to iterate continuously to improve what you've made. The sort of most extreme example of this, I think, comes from TripAdvisor. I think TripAdvisor is maybe not the most innovative company in the world, but I do actually really like this idea from their founder, which is what they call the click test. So, before you actually build something, you just put the TripAdvisor has historically just put a link on their website, and then they see how many people click it. So the idea is if people want some new feature on the TripAdvisor website, a lot of people will click it, and then TripAdvisor will know to build that thing. I think a sort of another maybe heuristic to know if you're launching your product fast enough is advice that Reid Hoffman, who's the founder of LinkedIn and was an investor in our first company, likes to give, which is that if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. And what I think Reid means by this is that you've taken too long to try to perfect the product, the thing that you're building in your own mind. But the thing is, you can't actually know the perfect product without getting it in users' hands and getting their feedback. So the most important thing when launching something is doing it fast. So how do you actually do this in real life? I guess I'll turn a little bit, again, to the experience of Wealthsimple. Well, it's good to start with a problem that you experience. You want to make sure that you're solving a real problem and not some problem that is imagined, which happens quite a lot. Is this a problem that you're facing, that your friends are facing? Do you know that this is a challenge that someone is having that you think should be addressed? And of course, this is a problem for financial advice is a problem that we experience firsthand. But ideally, it's not just a problem that you experience yourself, but it's a problem you know something about. And I think, in our case, like I said, this is not something that investing is not something that I knew a great deal about at the time, but it is something a whole lot that my co-founder knew a whole lot about, which is great. So we always like to show this picture of Mike when he was a 12-year-old, when he won a stock picking contest at age 12. I always had a lifelong interest in personal finance, and I think having that sort of that knowledge is really, really important and helpful. And then the third thing really is to solve it in the simplest possible way you can. So to really create a minimum viable product. So I showed you the sort of first version of Wealthsimple, which was this Google Drive spreadsheet. from which we learned, hey, this is still too complicated for our clients, me being one of the clients, we want something easier. Let's keep iterating and make the service better. And so here actually you can see sort of an evolution of our products, at least the evolution of our marketing website over the last 4.5 years. I wanted to point out that the sort of blue screen is what we launched with in September of 2014, Smart Investing Made Simple. There were like 1 million things that our website didn't do at the time. We didn't charge our clients fees. So we said we would charge them, but we didn't actually build the software that would like figure out how much to charge them. We had a fully online account opening process, including e-signatures, but we actually had to like print out the applications and take them to our partner and push the paper through their back office process to get the accounts opened. We didn't have automated withdrawals. That was also something that we did entirely manually. There were 1 million things that we didn't do, but like the key thing that we really tried to do was like, hey, we need to figure out how we're going to get people to trust us enough to invest with us. And we decided at launch that we didn't need those things in order to figure out the main issues that we needed to address. As we've grown, I think we've tried to sort of continue to build according to this philosophy of launch quickly, iterate and learn from your clients as much as possible. That it becomes more complicated as you get bigger. I think the primary risk is when you're starting something new is that like no one's going to use it. And now we're past that problem. We actually have, like I said, hundreds of thousands of clients now who rightly have a very high expectations about the quality of the products that we ship to the market. And so we've had to adapt our launch strategy with products a little bit in order to still continue to develop products according to this ethos. So the latest example actually is our new application, Wealthsimple Trade, which offers, or will offer when it's fully launched, commission-free stock trading to the Canadian market. So we're currently in beta. We have a few thousand clients using it, and we're learning a ton from them about what works, what doesn't work, what they want, et cetera. But the cool thing that we were able to do was sort of our version of the TripAdvisor click test was when we launched, we had a very alpha version of our product that we were using internally with just our team, but we basically just launched a waiting list. So we put up a marketing website, announced it to the press, and asked people to sign up for the waiting list. And it was really cool because we got to see like, hey, a heck of a lot of people do actually want this thing. Like this is definitely something that like, we want to invest in and prioritize. So can speak more about that later. But we've had to adapt this sort of launch and iterate philosophy, but it's been really, really critical. I think I wanted to maybe, you may be asking yourself the question, why does speed matter so much? And I think, speed is really important in the early days of a startup because you're not sure if what you're working on is going to be any good or not. And you want to go fast because you don't want to waste your own time. But it also matters because the pace of change in the marketplace is accelerating so fast. Innovation is accelerating so fast that speed is, I think, just like a really important part of business today. And to illustrate that, wanted to show you the time it's taken these different technologies from the telephone to Pokemon Go to reach 50 million users in our history. So the telephone took 75 years to reach 50 million users back in the day. The radio took 38 years. TV took 13 years from launch. The internet took 4 years. Facebook took 3.5 years. And Pokemon Go took only 19 days. So, and it's only getting faster. I think the iPhone is roughly now 11 years old. So it's been around for about a decade. And, it's interesting to think, like, will it still be around in 10 years' time? Maybe, maybe not. The last piece, it's one of the last pieces of advice that I think I'd like to give you, in addition to trying to launch fast, if you want to build a new product, the second piece of advice that I think is really important is to do things that don't scale. So I think a lot of young founders believe that they're going to make something and it's either going to take off or it's not. And you're going to build a better mousetrap, and either you're going to see like tons of people flocking to the new app that you've built, and you're going to know that there's an awesome market, or they're not going to use it, and you're going to know that there's not a market. And I think that's actually that's sort of a false premise. Startups require like a ton of like manual effort in addition to just writing the code that makes the product work. And I think to go back to YC again, Paul Graham, the founder of YC, always uses the metaphor of an old school car engine before an electrical starter. So you have to like crank it and go through all this laborious process to get the thing running, to get the thing started. But once it was running, it actually runs pretty well. And that's really the case of most any successful company. So in addition to sort of like, writing the simplest version of the product, you're actually going to need to go out and spend a lot of time talking to your users and convincing them to use it. And I think that's definitely been the case with Wealthsimple. It's been I think it's been 4.5 years, and we are now at, I think, like an exciting scale and momentum that's really cool for us to be at, and I think very exciting. But it hasn't always been this way. So, for instance, to reach our last $1 billion from $2 billion to $3 billion, it took us about 6 months for that to happen, which is awesome. But by comparison, in our first 6 months, from September of 2014 to March of 2015, over that 6 months' time, we acquired 500 clients in total for $10 million in assets. So it's like 10 million then versus $1 billion now. So it's a factor of 2 orders of magnitude. So things just don't work overnight, and you really need to roll up your sleeves, talk to your clients, and convince them to use what you're building, and make what you're building different based on their feedback, so that they'll use it. The final theme that I'd like to address before moving on to the fireside chat is one of naive ambition. And I'd just like to say, there aren't a lot of companies in Canada or elsewhere that aspire to reach $1 trillion by their 15th birthday, which is one of our stated ambitions. And it remains to be seen whether or not we'll get there or not. But I think that there's a real shot that we will. And the cool thing about setting out lofty ambitions is that it gives you a North Star from which you can work backward and lay out a plan to actually get there. And once you can do that, really sort of ambitious things become much easier to achieve. And I think speaking specifically to this audience here at the University of Toronto, I think one of the things that Mike, my co-founder, always likes to talk about is how he wants to see more ambitious Canadian entrepreneurs. And for me as an outsider here, or at least as an American, when I look at the Canadian economy and the startup market, I see incredible strengths and incredible talent in some of the world's leading universities. And I think that Canada is incredibly well positioned over the next 10 to 20 years to create some of the biggest and best companies in the world. And I think it's pretty cool for me to be here today, because it's going to be the people in this room, people like you and at this university that make it happen. So thank you very much for inviting me here today, and good luck.
So, Brett, that was really a wonderful talk. It was very eye-opening. And so the organizing committee has put together some questions for you, just to start the fireside chat. And
Awesome.
I'm going to open the floor for Q&A. So let's start with this question. Engineering students like dealing with certainty and known quantities. Entrepreneurship is all about the unknown and the uncertain future. What strategies do you use to deal with uncertainty as COO?
Yeah, this is, uncertainty is sort of a fundamental reality that we face at our business. So, I mean, if you think about it, we have to tell our clients constantly to focus on what they can control, because they're being invested in risky assets that over the long term, we believe will go up and ultimately be beneficial for them, but in the short term can go down in value, as they have, for instance, over the last few months. So, you know, it's really then a question of figuring out, like, what are the things that you can control as an entrepreneur. And so, you know, I think to go back to the talk, it's, you know, you can control the sort of the scope of the thing that you're trying to build. So you can make it sort of the surface area of that thing as small as possible, so that you're able to launch it as quickly as possible, which I think is a good thing. I think that there's also, you know, with internet businesses today, there's so much data. I think there's actually like a surprising amount that you can learn from even small amounts of data if you're really paying attention to the way your clients use your product, both analytically and also sort of, you know, just talking to them and learning from them and making inferences based on that.
Good. Next question is, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently, A, in school, and B, in your early career?
Well, I might have applied to the University of Toronto.
That's a good answer.
It's just kind of a funny question because, you know, I'm now 37, and, you know, I had an amazing time at university, and it's hard to, you know, I don't feel like I have regrets per se, but I do wish that, I do probably wish that I had done what you guys are doing, which is to do a more technical engineering degree rather than my arts and sciences degree. You know, I think that, you know, at least in the day-to-day, my day-to-day work, it's like analyzing data is a constant. I spent a lot of time programming computers, and it's something that I had to teach myself rather than having learned it in school, which would have been good. So I definitely wish that I had like a more technical education. That being said, though, you know, I think it's pretty cool too that you know, technology today is something that you can learn on your own, as we have. So you know, learning doesn't really stop when you leave the university, and you just have to sort of keep pushing yourself to learn. So the other thing that I would say is, you know, I think that, like, I love working on companies, and I love working especially on very young new companies where you really get to build everything from scratch, including your product and the team. And I think rather than having gone to McKinsey to start, I probably would have rather looked for a growth stage company. Something like the stage that Wealthsimple is in now. Because the cool thing about joining a company that's, you know, in our stage now is that you get this network of people who are also sort of interested in similar stuff to you. So, and I think that's pretty cool. And then you also get to see a company that's growing pretty fast. It changes really quickly, which can be both good and bad. I think it can be stressful because your job changes every 6 months. But the positive side of that is that also you just get to like see a lot. So you see what works, you see a lot of stuff that doesn't work. And I think it's just a really good place to learn about starting a company.
You talked a little bit about wanting to have been trained in more technical skills. What would you say is the most important non-technical skill that is undervalued in the workplace? And do you have a story you can give us?
Yeah, a story. I'm not really the storyteller at our company. Let's see. Maybe a couple of things come to mind. And I don't know if these are technical or not. I think they might be analytical. But actually, let me start over. So one of the sort of like early values at Wealthsimple was that, or sort of early themes, it was never formally a value, is that we are all maker owners. And this is a bit of a tangent, but the maker part is like, we all need large chunks of time during the day in order to like really be effective. So it's like hard to like really program something that's going to be meaningful if your like day is carved up by meetings all day long. Same goes with like any new thing that you're setting up at the company, including like, the customer support team or the way to do some new operational process or whatever it is. So we're all makers, but then in addition to that, we're all owners. So literally, all employees of Wealthsimple have equity in the company, and we want everyone at the company to feel like they are the CEO, that they're the one in charge. So I think maybe that's like, that's sort of like one thing, like this sort of like ownership mentality that is something that we really value. So it's like, you may be the co-op working on some one of our many teams now at the company, but it's like really good to try to put yourself in the shoes of the CEO and think like the CEO to understand both the context of what you're doing and like the why you're doing what you're doing. Because ultimately you're going to come up with a better solution if you have those things. And I think maybe the second thing, which is, I don't know, arguably technical, arguably not, is just sort of conciseness of communication, I think can be really important. What can be said in a sentence is better said in a sentence than in many pages or many slides. So that would be another thing.
You talked about co-op interns, and I know Wealthsimple does hire a lot of students. In your opinion, what could universities do better to prepare students for success in your field?
This is a hard question for me to answer for a couple of reasons. One, I think, is now having observed the Canadian academic system, I think in a lot of ways it's better than the American academic system, or at least the university system. One, it's much more affordable and therefore more accessible, which I think is really good. And therefore more diverse. The second thing is, I think in a lot of university programs here, the sort of co-op program is much more well integrated into the academic calendar. So students come out of university not just having done 4 years of classroom work, but also have like real world experience, which I think is really, really good. So I think those things are really, really good parts of the Canadian education system, which I'd like to see maybe replicated elsewhere around the world. In terms of what can be improved, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'll tell you after the student teaching.
I'd be curious to hear what the room thinks, actually.
Yeah, that's for the Q&A.
Okay.
So you talked about instead of starting at McKinsey, one of the things you might have done is join a company at the stage that Wealthsimple is at. So, if you were to go on beyond what you're doing now and to do a third startup, what do you think it would be on?
That's a good question. I think this is also something I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, because I spend a lot of time thinking about Wealthsimple. I think maybe, like I said in my talk, it's really can be beneficial, or at least easier, to start a company that's solving a problem that you yourself face, and something that you know something about. So, I think now at this stage of my life at 37, I face a different set of challenges than I faced 10 years ago. So, I just bought an apartment. I'm engaged to be married. And I think I would probably think about financial services or sort of technology products related towards working professionals and who are wanting to start families, or maybe two areas. I think structurally, in terms of industries, I think one interesting industry to start a business in now is the cannabis industry. There's this structural change going on in Canada, in the US, and around the world, where this thing that has previously been illegal is now legal and widely used. And I think there'll probably be lots of large companies of great value created in that space. And then, what I would love probably to do the most, though, is to go back to school and get really good at data science and do something in that field.
We have a program here.
Okay.
It's clear from your talk and what you've been saying that relationships are important to you. And engineering science is a very close-knit community because people work together day in, day out on projects. And it's been observed that you and your co-founder, Rudy Adler, have done, 2 startups now together. And what do you think is the reason why your relationship is so successful?
So Rudy's actually a good friend of mine from the 4th grade. So we both grew up in Arizona. And we've now been good friends and business partners and colleagues. I was the best man at his wedding last year. So I think we have a pretty unique relationship, and I feel very fortunate to be friends with him. In some ways, we're a bit more like brothers at this point than friends or colleagues. It's like there's also in some ways there's an emotional distance sometimes, like you have with your siblings. I think we have pretty complementary skills, which I think is good. I think we both have a tremendous amount of respect for one another. I think I'm not sure that I have good advice on that, other than, I got lucky. I met a really awesome person very young in my life. And I think as you sort of age and grow older and change, not everyone in your life changes in the same way, and you lose contact with people. But he's been someone that I've been able to stay in touch with very close since a long time ago, which is awesome. I'm not sure I have advice to share there.
So students in general they have a growing interest in doing startups. And so as a result, the University of Toronto is always committed to helping them network and form connections. What would be your best tips? You have a fantastic partner, but in terms of growing your network, what tips would you have to students to grow that network and make contact with, say, an angel investor?
Yeah. I guess first off, I would say, in terms of networking, being at a university is in some ways the best way to build a network organically. you're surrounded by a bunch of other similarly smart, talented, ambitious people. And I think really establishing good, strong friendships here is super important, because like the cool thing is too is, I think as you age, you will find that people go off and do different things, but everyone is going to sort of succeed over time in their careers, and it's awesome to sort of maintain the relationships that you start in university. So I'd say first in terms of networking, like awesome place to do it now where you're at. In terms of specifically networking with angel investors, it is the investing business is a little weird. So it is very network driven, and it's really important to really the best investors will only talk to you if you get introduced to them by someone they already know. And part of the obviously creates a chicken and egg problem if you don't know anybody. How the hell are you going to find someone to make an introduction for you if you don't know anybody? But I think the reason that I think most investors will tell you is it's a good test, right? It's in order to start a successful company, you're going to need to solve a wide variety of problems, not all of which are technical. And can you solve this problem being introduced to me? So I would say it's a good question to ask. So then the question becomes how do you kickstart your network? And I think the way we did it in Silicon Valley at least was getting into Y Combinator, which was a huge thing. It's a highly competitive thing. So. And it's a bit of a crapshoot, I think, now as it's gotten more competitive, so it's not something you can bank on. But there are other programs like it that I think are also good and are good ways to sort of jumpstart your network. And I don't know, I think maybe just do your research, right? It's figure out who's investing in what types of companies. Try to figure out where people will be. Go introduce yourself.
Good tips. I'll switch to two slightly more business or tech-oriented questions for you, and then we'll open the floor to general questions. So financial markets operate in a constantly changing landscape of government regulations and other factors. How do you approach addressing this challenge when there isn't a precedent set?
So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. If the question's about regulation, we operate in a highly regulated environment, which is good. So, we are a financial services company, and I think globally we have 5 different regulators. But in Canada, our primary regulators are the Provincial Securities Commissions and this institution called IROC, which is a self-governing industry institution governing the brokerages. I think in general, our approach to regulation is multi-pronged. So one is we try to establish good relationships with the regulators to understand who they are, what's important to them. Because oftentimes we find that, sort of the letter of the regulation or whatever is different maybe than what the intent of the regulation is. And maybe some regulation was written, 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago and didn't think about the technology that would now be present. So we try to understand the intent of regulation so that we can work with regulators to help explain how we may be delivering technology or financial services in a more novel way that's actually helps achieve the original intent. We also build a lot of technology. A lot of regulation is about doing very specific tasks that actually a computer is better suited to do than a human. So we like to build lots of technology to help us meet our regulatory requirements as well.
And last question. Wealthsimple was created in the time of a bull market. How do you think you would have to adapt in leaner times?
Well, we are in a leaner time now. And it, will have an impact on our business. I think a big piece of this is education. So we try to spend a lot of energy and time to educate our clients on the benefits of long-term investing and how, for at least our risky investing products, they're not meant to be short-term investments. And so that actually in a bear market, it could be an opportunity to buy assets at a lower price than during a bull market. We also think that in general, our portfolios perform, or we expect our portfolios to perform better than the portfolios of most consumers in the marketplace. So we actually think that a bear market is a good opportunity for us to ask potential clients to compare the performance of their existing portfolio with what they might have done at Wealthsimple. So we actually think it's a really good opportunity for us to attract new clients. And we also want to make sure that we have our clients invested in the right portfolios. So we're constantly our investment research team. This is not a part of the company that I focus on, but our investment research team is constantly analyzing our portfolios and trying to understand if we are investing our clients in the best possible way in terms of the risk-return trade-off.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now I think it's a good time for us to open the floor for some questions. So yeah, as I mentioned, the way we'll do it is probably best is raise your hand if you have a question, and if you're selected, please stand and make sure everyone hears what you're saying. Okay, let's start here in the front.
I wrote this down earlier.
Do you mind introducing yourself too?
Oh yeah, my name's Jack for Strange Side here. You mentioned on your last slide you had some hitting, do things that don't scale, and I know you were talking about it, but I didn't really get how it connected to your heading. And I'm sounding like I'm a PowerPoint analyzer. It's not bad. I'm interested in what you mean, and I didn't get what you meant by it.
Oh, do things that don't scale.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you for asking the clarifying question. So doing things that don't scale are often things that programmers don't like to do. So programmers often like to write scripts and programs and applications that automate stuff and make things happen easily without their work. But a lot of the early work at getting a company off the ground and getting it started and getting traction is more labor intensive than writing code. And it'll involve mostly going out to talking to your clients and your users and understanding what it is that they want and how they're using their product or not and what they might change. And it's also a lot about sales. So it's like getting people, convincing people to use the thing that you're building. I think once you have something that works and has traction, you can actually spend dollars on it and start to market it. But in the very early days, you don't really want to do marketing. You just want to do sales. You want to go talk to people one-on-one and get them to use your product. So I think I didn't make the point super well when I was presenting the slide, but what was on the slide was, I think, a couple of examples of the way we talked to our clients and the way we sort of did sales in the very early days of Wealthsimple, which was, we spent a lot of time going to places of work and giving lunch and learns about the 5 rules of smart investing. And we'd often be in a room with 3 people or 4 people or 5 people or whatever, but we would share our knowledge about investing so that they could get smarter about investing, and if they wanted to, then they could use Wealthsimple. That maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. So that's an example of doing something that doesn't scale. But it's super valuable because doing things that don't scale, that involve talking to your clients, is super valuable because it's like really, really rich research that you're doing, essentially, to figure out how to make your product better.
Hello, yes, excellent, this is working. Hello, Brett, my name is Martin.
I don't actually think I need the mic. So.
Okay. Hey, Mark.
So to give you some context as to where my question's coming from, in engineering science, we specialize, well, actually, you should know that part, but basically there's two options I'm considering specializing into. Robotics versus ECE. And one of the issues I've encountered is that in robotics, it's more geared towards a general overview form of design as opposed to gaining specific technical skills. As, like, for example, in ECE, I learned how to design a specific type of microcontroller. That's beside the point. I was just wondering, which do you think is more important? Acquiring specific technical skills or looking at the entire design process and formulating designs that way? And why?
I mean, it's hard for me to comment specifically on robotics versus ECE, as I don't know a whole lot about either subject. I would say, I mean, without knowing much about it, it's like, I mean, the most important thing you learn at university is like how to think. So, you know, in some ways, you know, I know what I said earlier that I wish I had done more data science and more computer science, but in some ways, as long as what you're doing is challenging and teaches you some general framework about how to think, then it's probably good. And two, you should probably do the thing that you like doing more. So what's the thing that gets you excited to go to class every day and like makes you passionate about life? You should do that.
In your presentation, well, first of all, hello, my name is Armin.
Hi, Armin.
And second of all, in your presentation, you mentioned that you really like coming up with new ideas and growing them. You're at Wealthsimple now, but at some point, Wealthsimple will become a big company. What will you do then? And will you leave Wealthsimple? Will you try to innovate inside Wealthsimple or some other third option?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. There will be a day that I leave Wealthsimple. And I think it's one of the interesting things about starting a company that hopefully will last for many years and decades and potentially longer is that, you know, they really outlive the founders. You know, they're these sort of like creations that we make that like then have their own culture and way of working that then live on. So I think it'll be a good thing one day when I leave. You know, I think one of the funny things also about starting a company is I had mentioned in the context of a growing company, like the job feels like it changes every 6 months. So like and inevitably, because of growth, like everyone at the company is kind of doing something slightly different than they used to be doing and facing a different set of challenges. And one of the consequences of that is like you constantly feel like you don't know what you're doing, which is both good and bad. I think it's exciting to learn new things, to do new things, but it's also very stressful. So, you know, there may very well come a point where I'm not doing a very good job and need to leave. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question. But you know, I'm pretty happy for the time being. Would love to keep growing with the company. We'll also be happy to leave one day, and yeah, we'll see.
Hi, my name's Art Slutsky. Yeah. Believe it or not, I'm not a first-year eng science student. My question is something to follow up on something you mentioned. You mentioned the word trust. And that really intrigued me because if you're building an emoji company, you know, somebody's going to get an app and maybe send you their email address, and I can understand why people do that, right? But if people are going to send you $100, $1,000, $10,000, on the average it looked like you had 500, probably the average is $20,000 initially. That's real money. How do you get people to trust you that you're not going to abscond with it, that the company's not going to fall apart? So I was curious how you build trust in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think this is the core challenge. This has historically been the core challenge of our business. So it's really hard, especially when you're getting started. I think as you mentioned, we have, you mentioned sort of average asset size, and that's right. It's, depends on the business unit, but our retail business is roughly $20,000 per client. And our advisor's business roughly $100,000 per client, but we have multimillionaires on the platform, and we have people with $10 on the platform because we have no minimums. I think we've taken like a multifaceted approach to the trust question. So I think to sort of generalize the problem away from just Wealthsimple, and then maybe to talk more specifically about Wealthsimple, I think the way that companies do it in the general sense is to try to get big as fast as they can. Because you're more likely to trust something that feels big and feels like it's not going to go away. I think that's true both in terms of how people perceive the size. So it's if it's like a social network, like the number of people on the network, but also in terms of the business sense, is how profitable. Ultimately, are you building a company that's profitable and makes money? And so there's something real to it as well. So I think that's probably the general answer. Figure out how to get it big as fast as possible.
That's just rephrasing the question, really. Because
it is sort of.
It's a matter of trust.
It is sort of.
Who's going to send you the money until you're big enough?
So then, I think the answer is, well, what have we actually done? And, what we've actually done is, in the very first instance, we got our family and friends to join to use Wealthsimple. It's and let me tell you, my dad took a long time to convince. So, that's step one. And then, step two for us, maybe there's multifaceted steps or sort of simultaneous parallel steps. But, step two is try to get people to pay attention to you in the news media. Try to get your existing clients to refer other clients, because referrals are, I think, really high trust interactions. I think something that's maybe a little bit, well, actually, I guess makes sense, but maybe was non-obvious to us in the beginning, was to just make it really easy for people to test us out. So don't require your clients to trust you. Just allow them to get started with investing with $10 or $100 or some amount of money that they don't care about. But show that it can be a really good experience and that the system works really well. So give trust through empirical experience. And then finally, I think one of the things I mentioned in the talk is that we are, I think, innovators, but also don't necessarily think of ourselves as disruptors. And we've also relied on the brand value, the sort of brand value and established reputation of our investor in the marketplace. So our investor is Power Financial, which is a conglomerate holding company that has several well-known investment managers and insurance companies here in Canada and the US. And I think we've relied a little bit on the credibility that they have in the marketplace as well, which I think is actually an interesting path forward for financial services companies especially, where maybe customers aren't super inclined to trust a startup, but are more inclined to trust a more established institution. And a more established institution wants to innovate, but can't figure out how to do it. So, the partnerships like ours could actually be really big going forward with the trust question. But it's a hard thing. It's one of those things you never fully solve the trust question, right? So it's if you also think about it, it's the opposite side of the coin, I think, to my trust question on the established players is, do people actually trust the big banks? And, you know, there's actually, I think in general Canadians do. There's actually a lot of evidence that shows that like Americans, for instance, like just don't trust the big banks at all. So in some ways, like, you know, startups actually have like, by being a new brand, are starting from a different position than the legacy financial institutions that don't, you know, that just aren't trusted, that had the trust but then lost it along the way. So, but maybe the biggest point is that, like, you know, trust is this ongoing thing that you have to nurture, like any relationship.
Okay, we'll do a question directly. And, yeah.
Hello. My name is Andy, and I wanted to expand on something
Hi, Andy.
that I was in. What?
Hi.
Expand on something that you said in your presentation. You said how there was an old way of innovating, and then how there is a new way. Now, this, like, you know, new way means that your product will get iterated as the, like, you know, users use it and they would give feedback, right? But the thing is, it's like that, like, what if you, how do you know that, like, your product is like not fully complete, but it is good enough and that it will like survive its like launch? Because there are many products which were like so bad at the beginning that they just ended up dying as soon as they launched. So like, how do you know when like a product is like ready to be launched, to be iterated?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I think it's a little bit of an art, and I think you sort of like develop a sense for it with like more experience over time after you launch a few products. But I think the thing that I've observed with like people who are launching products for the first time is that like generally the first versions of their products are like too complicated, and like they have like too many bells and whistles, and they like you really just need to focus on like whatever core thing it is that you're trying to do, that you think will get the job done. So for us at Wealthsimple, it's like basically like, well, really the only thing that you need to be able to do is like you need to be able to, like, we have no clients and no assets, so it's like the only thing that you need to build is a way for a client to sign up for your service, right? That would be like the bare minimum. And then like once you have a client that has given you some money, you could build out the part that, the interface that they use once they have money invested, for instance. But you know, it's like that's the type of thinking I think that like ultimately like helps define an MVP. So it's like, you know, what is that like very minimum thing you need to test? And like maybe it's an onboarding flow and like a set of like basically like static websites that explains what your product will do but doesn't actually do yet.
Next, someone on this side?
Hi, I'm Connor.
Hey, Connor.
I just have a question concerning like automated investors and traditional IAs. So if these automated investors have like much lower commission and this outperformance factor, how does that not signify like disruption of like the traditional system that IAs have? And like, does that not mean that you're pushing them out of the market basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the business models are evolving and changing. I think that slide about disruptors is meant that like we are open to working with existing players in our industry. Obviously, we've taken investment from them. We're looking to partner with them actively. But like business models are changing, and I think that, you know, that's ultimately a good thing. It's like if technology can do something better and ultimately like make a service more accessible and lower cost, it's probably like a net positive thing for the economy. I think in particular on the financial advice, I think there is still, like, we really do believe that there is still lots of room to have like face-to-face or like voice-to-voice contact with a real live human being, financial advisor. And part of the reason why we think that is that, you know, this sort of core idea that like money is often like anxiety provoking for people, and that having like someone that you trust and you can talk to and that can sort of like be your money therapist is actually like a good thing and is like a really valuable thing. So like one of the ways that we're expanding our business now is, in addition to the direct-to-consumer retail business, we're partnering with existing independent advisors to allow them to use our technology to offer with their clients. And they provide all the other stuff that we don't do. And some of that maybe we will do more of in the future, but a lot of stuff we won't. It's like, you know, financial planning and making sure that people stick to their plan is really important. And actually, if you look at the data, that's sort of like people making the right decisions and like not selling when the markets are low and buying when the markets are high is actually like the #1 driver of performance more than anything, including fees. So it's like if like a human advisor can help one of their clients stick to their plan, that's actually better. That leads to better outcomes for clients in the end. So like there is space, and I think I think it's something that like, you know, not everyone wants that. And I'm sure like not everyone in the room feels that way. Probably a lot of people. This is a very technical audience. So I imagine like some people would feel very comfortable like just interacting entirely with a computer, but not everyone feels that way.
One last question.
For sure. Hi, I'm Spencer, first
Hey.
year Untitled here.
Awesome.
You've talked a bit about uncertainty, and we've all heard the doom and gloom stories of early entrepreneurs, you know, sleeping on their parents' couch, not being able to afford groceries, those kinds of things. I want to know to what extent have you faced those kinds of issues, and to what kind of advice you would give to students that are potentially looking at going down the same road?
So I mean, I definitely worked without an income for the first many months of my first company in San Francisco. You know, I was coming from a different position where I had worked for a few years, so I had a little bit of money saved up, so I wasn't like sleeping on my parents' couch and I wasn't starving. I actually think that I would say that it's, unless you like feel absolutely compelled to start a company right out of college, it's probably better to go get a job first. Because you can make a little bit of money, which takes a little bit of the pressure off. You can meet some more people, learn about what it's like to operate in a company versus being in an academic environment. So like I would say, like unless you're dying to start a company, like do that. Like get a good job for a couple of years.
Well, thank you very much, Brett. That was wonderful, very informative.
Awesome.